Alright, hello everyone, Simon here, and welcome to my series on the architecture of Dishonored 2. I'm Simon. Believe it or not, I have a PhD in architecture. Don't take that too seriously, it just means I'm a certified architecture nerd, I guess. Alright, so this series, we're gonna look through the levels of the game Dishonored 2, as well as the expansion Death of the Outsider. And we're gonna look at architecture. So one of on the topic of architecture in video games. So the truth is, people usually don't pay that much attention to architecture in video games or even in the real world, because like architecture is like the background on which everything else happens, right? Right? When you play a video game like this, you're focusing on gameplay, you're focusing on characters and story. You're not really focusing on like the walls and columns and doors and windows. But without those things, without the architecture, you can't have a game, especially not like this. So in this video series, we're going to focus on the architecture, and in fact, I've taken out all the enemies so we can take our time and look at the architecture uninterrupted by people trying to kill us. So we're gonna, well, I'm gonna try to, I aim to explore the relationship between architecture and gameplay, story, characters, the rest of the setting, things like the technology, the ecology, the culture, the economics, and we're also going to look at how the architecture in the game might relate to what we understand about the real world and like real world architecture or real world settings. Is there anything I need to explain about that? I think as I go through the game and I go through the levels, this stuff will become apparent. But just to like briefly, so consider things like this, for example. Like what we're looking at right now, we have candles and we have electric lights with these like glass lenses on the chandelier. So the fact that there's like candles and electricity, for example, that already tells us something about the technology, right? I'll get more into that later, but just an example of how like furnishings like this and how buildings are built tells us about the setting that we're in. Like, what is the technology available in the game? What is the economy like? What is the culture like? Okay, so let's get started. We start the game in Dunwall Tower, which is the palace of Dunwall. Dunwall is the city. It's the capital city of the Empire of the Isles. I don't want to get too much into like that background stuff. Anyway, so this is the throne room. We are in the palace, and I'm just gonna walk through the rooms here, and then after that we'll talk more. Right? So where I am is we are at the front door. Unfortunately, we can't go through the door because this being the start of the game, this is the tutorial level, and so we are kind of locked into a small space. We can't just go around and explore the whole world. So we start off in the throne room, and the story is that I'm the Empress. I'm the Empress, you guys. So we're the Empress, and there's just been a coup, and that explains why there are dead people lying around on the floor. There's been a coup. It was a violent coup. People are dead, and now they're trying to kill us. They're trying to kill the old Empress and install a new one. And the coup happened right in the throne room. Right. So the throne room looks like this. Come in straight the front door, and then back here we have... This was the throne. I mean, that's a chair, right? So the throne looks like that, right? Keep that in mind. We'll talk more about that later on, I think. Long live the Empress, in memory of Jessamine Coldwin. Jessamine Coldwin was my mother. So I'm playing as Emily Coldwin. And I was sitting here when the coup happened and a lot of people died. Alright. So the throne room of the Empress of the palace is here. There's a door there, but I don't think that opens. No. Okay, that door is blocked. So to the back, behind two doors on either side, we have this space, which... What is this? I guess there's a little bit of a waiting room. There are chairs here and some drinks, I guess. I guess if you wanted to meet, like if the Empress wanted to meet certain people in private, you would come back out of the throne room and talk to them back here. I guess that's the purpose of this space. There's no clear purpose otherwise, right? And then, okay, so this is like a semi-public space. So the throne room, let's say the throne room is the public space where the Empress greets the public, right? And then here, slightly more private. And then off to one side, we have a staircase with another bit of a seating area down here. And then up the stairs, we start getting into the Empress's private quarters. We have this thing here. I'm going to talk more about all these spaces, but let me just walk through the whole thing first. And then we have sort of a library, but it's also an atrium. Interesting that you can like look down at the people down there. You can imagine like if you invite people in here, you can kind of see who they are before you go down to greet them. And although they can see you as well if they look up, often people don't look up. People often don't look up and down very much. They look like straight ahead. And so like the Empress, you can imagine they can see like who they're gonna meet before they go down there to meet them. So that's interesting, so you can look down at them. Also a library space. And then back here, through a rather unremarkable door, we have an office. So this, I believe, would be the Empress's private office. Oh, there's a dead guy there, don't worry about it. So the Empress's office, whatever paperwork she needs to do happens in here. The books are outside. I was going to say there's not that many bookshelves or storage in here. You got to wonder how much paperwork she actually does, given there's not much paper in the room. Okay, so that's that side. And then on this side, behind these doors, imagine these doors are closed. So this is more private, if these were closed. And then back here we have a bed. So the bedroom is here with a fireplace, so it's pretty cozy. Bedroom's here, and then over here we have a bathroom. I guess this is the toilet. Right. And then over here we have the wardrobe. I think this is the Empress's wardrobe, because there's no other wardrobes anywhere else up here. Although, this might also be the linen closet. No, I think that's just the wardrobe. It's kind of strange wardrobe though. Okay, so this is the whole room. The whole it's not the whole palace. It's this part of the palace. Okay, let's go back down to the throne room and look at things in detail. You'll notice that it's kind of like a standard house, right? You have, I guess, a lounge area. Aside from the throne room, you kind of have a lounge area, and then you have an office space, and then you have like a bedroom and a toilet. What's missing? What's missing is a kitchen. That's kind of strange. There's no kitchen here. But you'll notice that down here, you see how that goes to the staircase. But this is just solid. There's nothing back here. Like, if I were to design this as a sort of a house or an apartment, I would put the kitchen there, because that's where it makes sense. And we might have like a dining and a kitchen there. But there's no dining and kitchen at anywhere in the Empress's apartment, which is what I would call this. This is the Empress's apartment. Not sure why. There is like a dining and kitchen in the rest of the palace, but it's kind of disconnected from this apartment. And I guess, like, if I had to give it a reason, I would guess that it's because this is a tutorial level, and they tried to make it as simple as possible. And so they just reduced the number of unnecessary spaces for the purposes of gameplay and for the purposes of teaching the game mechanics to the player. So if you had like more rooms back there, it would just be more complicated and just make it more difficult for the player to understand what's going on. So I think it's a adjustment that they made for the sake of gameplay, But architecturally, it doesn't really make sense that there's no kitchen up here. Right? Okay. Right, so back to the throne room. What can we say about this throne room? You know, it's kind of dark in here, isn't it? Look at that. It's kind of dark in here, and there's no windows. You can't see outside. Notice how dark and how closed in we are. This does actually tell us something about the character of Emily Caldwell, the Empress. It's the Empress. I think what this says is that the Empress is actually kind of detached from the outside world. Like, we are enclosed in our own palace, and we're not really aware of what's going on in the outside world. I mean, look at this. You can't see outside. And this is actually consistent with the rest of the story, how the story plays out. So there's it's very pretty, but everything is decorative and not actually real if you look at it. These columns, I mean, you have to it's kind of dark, so you can't really see. If you think about it, we are the columns aren't actually this wide. If you it's not even that wide. If you look up there, actually, can I climb up there? Let me just think about this. I can't really climb up there. So the actual width of the column is only that wide. Can you see that? And then, so the actual column is not that thick. We are at the, I mean, the game doesn't tell you yet, we're at the very top of Dunwall Tower. So we're in the penthouse level. And so there's nothing above us. The columns are only holding up the roof. They're not holding up any more floors above us, right? So the columns are not actually that wide, but then they add this decorative stuff on the outside of the structural column to make it look bigger than it actually is. Right? Because, you know, if it's a throne room, you're trying to impress people. You want your columns to be girthy, right? You want to impress your guests with the size of your columns. You know what I mean? Whereas structurally, it's not actually that big. It doesn't need to be that big. So it's there's the column that actually holds up the roof, and then all this stuff is just to make it look bigger than it actually is. You can understand why you would do this to impress people in the throne room, but we also have to think about that it's not real, right? It's not really that thick. The column's not really that thick, so there's a sort of a fakeness to it, right? Like, it looks impressive, but in reality, it's not actually that impressive. And again, that is fitting with the whole theme of this thing. Is that the Empress. The Empress is the Empress, or is she supposed to be, you know, the Empress, but she also doesn't actually have that much power, and she's also actually kind of disconnected with the outside world. And, you know, everything's kind of dark. And if you look at this throne room, it's actually not that big. It's actually kind of small. So the Empress is not as powerful as she might seem, is what the architecture is telling us. And also, as you play through the game, the whole game basically tells you that the rest of the empire is not really it's not really on board with with the Empress. In fact, I mean, the coup happened, so they're rebelling basically. So everything looks pretty and sturdy and big, but actually in reality not so much. Before, I talked a little bit about the existence of candles and also electric lights at the same time. That's actually a little strange if you think about it. Like, if you have electric light, why would you also light the candles? Because the candles are a real pain in the ass. You have to change them all the time. You have to light each one individually. The fact that these are still in the same space, in the same room, suggests that the electric lights are relatively new. And if we look at the furnishings, like the circular lenses, right? Like this is reminiscent of I guess turn of the early 1900s, before the two world wars. Like, the level of glass making technology at that time and lens making technology at the time, it's pretty good, but it's also not that advanced. So this suggests that the electric lights are relatively new, and that's why the candles are still here, because they haven't taken the candles out yet. And maybe the electric lights are not entirely reliable, and so they still have the candles here in case the electric lights don't work. So when you see like two different levels of technology side by side like this, I mean, if it's like the practical reason for that happening is because this is a transitional time where you're transitioning from one technology to the other, and that's why they exist side by side. I mean, people might choose to do something like this for decorative purposes, or if they just like candles sometimes, but usually it's not that. Usually it's because, like, if it happens a lot, usually it's because, like, this is right at the moment when you're introducing new technology, and the old stuff is still there, right? I think that's all I have to say about the throne room. It's dark. It's not that big. The columns are kind of fake. So it looks impressive, but in reality it's actually like a very simple and not impressive room. Right. Okay, moving on back here. So the furnishings, again, like it's very decorative, isn't it? So it looks very impressive. There's a lot of details, a lot of little bits and pieces. Timber. It looks very fancy, doesn't it? Like, you know, you would... fancy architecture. Like a lot of like shiny little gilded pieces and a lot of these little decorative things. You're showing off, basically. You're showing off how rich you are to your guests. But as soon as we get past this, though, things simplify substantially once you get past that room. So already, like, you see, like, those little things, they're not in here. Well, I mean, they kind of are. But they're less prominent, right? And then, like, all these little gold trim, like all these little gold things and all these patterns, once you get through here, it's just wood. Like, there's no paint. I mean, there's still a bit of carving, but it very quickly becomes a lot more modest. The furniture, there's an interesting mix, in fact. Like, there's straight lines here, straight angles here, and then there's like these curved wood things here. The furniture is, like, there's a whole lot of different styles of furniture, which is kind of odd. Like, look at this, and then look at that. It suggests that all the furniture, like different pieces of furniture were acquired at different times, it seems like. Which would mean that, you know, the Empress has been here for a long time and there hasn't been a major renovation for a long time, is what it suggests, right? Which, I don't know, maybe the Empress is getting a little too comfortable. They've been here too long and there hasn't been any big changes for too long. Maybe that's what it means. Although there is one thing I forgot to talk about this one. The throne itself, like everything else, is not that special. The throne itself, this is a metal chair. And if you look at all the other furniture, it's all wood. So this is unusual. It looks it looks almost too modern, right? Because everything else so far, I think I've said this, maybe I haven't said it enough yet. Like, the technology level of the game is kind of not early industrial, it's kind of a pre-war, late industrial revolution sort of technology. And the curves on this metal chair here is a little bit more advanced than that. Or like it's a little bit more futuristic than that. So interestingly, the throne itself that the Empress sits on is more modern than most of the other pieces of furniture here. Although I guess this is like the fanciest piece of furniture in the entire apartment, which is her throne, which makes sense. Like, this is the throne, so this is the fanciest piece. Is this wood or leather? This is leather, isn't it? This is the only leather chair, I think. So, regarding Industrial Revolution, like from the real world, we understand that advances in steel making and like glass making led to these materials being more available and thus more widely used in architecture So like glass lenses like those, and like steel furniture like this. Like before the Industrial Revolution, steel was expensive. Like you have like blacksmiths making steel things by hand, and they're like super expensive. So, well, I mean, I guess the emperors would be able to afford super expensive things. But, you know, as things like steel making and glass making became more mechanized and automated during the Industrial Revolution, like they became like use more machines to make them instead of making things by hand, then like the volume of production increases and therefore the price of these things drop because they're more available, there's more supply. And so eventually there's enough like steel and glass products for more people to be able to afford them, right? So rarity implies more expensive, which implies then only rich people can afford them. So when you see things in any environment, like in any culture, in any environment, like things that are common suggest that they're not expensive, whereas things that are rare suggest they're expensive, right? So the fact that we only have one metal chair in the entire space suggests that metal, or especially like curved metal, is still expensive enough that you don't really use it for furniture. Right, so we keep that in mind. We'll see more examples of this. Is that most of the city is in stone and wood, and in fact here, like most of this is in wood, and behind the wood paneling is actually stone, by the way. So most of this is stone and wood, and then there are like little bits of metal, which again, you know, these days metal is not that expensive. In our time, I mean, in the real world. And so like we wouldn't say that like a metal chair was anything too special. But back in the early 1900s, metal furniture would be a little bit fancier, I guess, especially things in this shape, right? In like a giant block of it, like this. All right, back to our tour here. This staircase is odd, in the sense that it takes up way too much space. Why does it take so much space? Because like this doesn't do anything. This whole thing here doesn't do it. If you just want to go upstairs, you can just put the stair here and then have like another room there, right? Why do you need a corridor that comes around here? A corridor that comes around here and around here and around here and then the stairs. And that leaves this space underneath the stairs, which doesn't really serve any useful function except just a thing you can sit in. So there's a lot of like useless space down here, and then also when you go up the stairs. What is this? What is this space? Again, it doesn't do anything. Okay, there's a chair there. There's a chair there. What is the function of this space? There's no function. So architecturally, you could have the stair in a much smaller space, maybe like right up here, and then have a whole other room over here. So why is this? This is not because of any good architectural reason. This is because of gameplay reasons. If you play the game, you will find that a guard, an enemy, one of the cool people who are trying to not COOP, one of the COUP people, the cool people who are trying to kill you, the emperors, they would like slowly walk up here. And the reason for this space is because this is a tutorial for how to sneak, right? You sneak by coming back here, and then you can like look down at the enemy slowly walking up the stairs, and then you can jump down there and avoid the enemy. So this thing is designed to teach the player how to avoid enemies by going behind them, right? Like they're underneath you, then they go up, and they don't see you because you're above them, and so on and so forth. So this architecturally useless space and that architecturally useless space is for the function of gameplay. And because of that, we excuse it, right? I mean, as an architect, you look at this as like, why would you put the stairs like this? It's such a waste of space. But it's a game. It's a video game. And sometimes you have to do things for gameplay. And in fact, this is similar too, because like if this is a library, it's a very inefficient library. Because there's no shelves in the middle, and you can only fit a library on the walls, and then there's a mezzanine here, and like, well, does this really serve any good function? In the gameplay it does, because in the gameplay you can see the guy walking through there, so the enemy who's trying to kill you, you come over here, you watch him slowly walk past, and then you come over here and you watch him slowly walk up the stairs, and then the game gives you plenty of time and a number of different ways of like getting past the enemy. You can like jump down here, for example. So some of the stuff you think, why would you design a house like this? You wouldn't. But again, for gameplay purposes, right? That's how we explain this. The office, is there anything I need to say about this? Not really. There is a metal grandfather clock here. This is interesting. So this is a very kind of modern industrial design. It's a curious mix, right? Because stylistically it is all metal and kind of curvy, and like artistically it's quite modern stylistically, but it's a grandfather clock. So mechanically it's pretty old-fashioned. It's just a grandfather clock. It's a pendulum clock. But like artistically, stylistically, it's quite modern. So again, this interesting thing where you have this transition in technology where they're still using some old things and they're mixing it with some new ideas. But yeah, yeah. Like from our perspective, it's like it's interesting because it's old. Some of it is old and some of it is new, and they're kind of jammed together. So for us, it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe like for people at the time, for them, it's just normal. Right? Maybe in the future people will look back at the things we do and they'll identify some things that are like this. So like it's a grandfather clock, but not really. It's not really a grandfather clock, because a grandfather clock would be like in a wooden housing, whereas this is just all steel. It's like a pendulum clock. The desk is very normal. It's just a wooden desk. In fact, it's kind of old and worn. Oh, that's interesting. The desk is worn. It implies that it's well used. So I guess the Empress does do a lot of paperwork, right? Because if you don't use the desk very much, it wouldn't be worn like this. Alright, okay, cool. Alright, we're gonna give the Empress a pass. She does do a lot of paperwork. Although again, a lot of this is empty space. Alright. Back here, the bedroom, there's no door to the bedroom. I guess this is the door to the bedroom, which means that the bed and the wardrobe and ensuite, this is technically all the private suite. Very fancy, isn't it? But it also means that there's no toilet for anyone else. You'll notice that there were no toilets downstairs. And like there are a lot of guards and a lot of like servants. Again, I think there should be more stuff back there, like toilets, dining, kitchen should be back there anyway. Again, gameplay reasons, tutorial level. We have a bunch of cabinets. And then otherwise, it's just a bed. And a little table for breakfast, I guess. Nothing too fancy, right? Really, really simple. It's like it's big. It's slightly decorative, but nothing special. It's just a bedroom, right? Nothing unremarkable. The wardrobe, again, walk-in wardrobe, kind of big, but fairly recognizable. Do you notice anything missing in the toilet? I'll give you 3 more seconds. There's nowhere to poop. Where do you poop? They forgot the pooper. There's like a cabinet, and there's a basin, and there's seats, and then there's an audiograph. I don't know why there's an audiograph in the toilet. There's even grapes and apples. But where do you poop? There's no pooping allowed. In fact, there's no pooper in the entire royal apartment, so I guess the Empress doesn't poop. I think that's an oversight. I mean, can you imagine if you wake up in the middle of the night and you just need to pee or something, and you have to like go all the way out downstairs and then out to the palace just to pee? Yeah, no, they forgot to poop it here. Alright, so this is the apartment. Again, it's nothing too special. It's basically just a house, missing the kitchen and dining. But it's relatively easy for us to understand, which is kind of strange because given that this is the Empress's apartment, you might imagine the Empress would have something more special, but fairly ordinary actually. There are a few things that I want to... I do have I've written notes here, but let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, no, that's everything. So okay, next thing I want to look at is the map. There is a map over here. There, that's actually a map, by the way. This is a map of the Empire of the Isles. So the Empire of the Isles is vaguely European. I mean, if you look at the architecture and the people and the furnishings, it's European, mostly European. We are currently in Dunwall, which is here. And Dunwall resembles London, Industrial Revolution London. Later in the game, we will go down to Serkonos, to Karnaca. Karnaca is vaguely Spanish, although it has some South American flavors to it. We'll talk more about that, and we'll see it. We'll see it when we get down there. I'm just gonna like tell you about that, tell you what to expect now. But currently we're in Dunwall. It's kind of like London, and we never actually visit any of those places, so we're not gonna talk about those. All right, so this is the Empire of the Isles. What else is there to say about it? Not too much. Given that this is like London and this is like Spain, you would imagine that this is the frozen north up here. Right, if you like take that distance and extrapolate there. I think it is colder up there, not sure how much colder though. The climate is a little strange, and when we get down to Karnaca, you'll see that the sun is a little strange. I don't know if that's like... Anyway, we'll talk more about it when we get there. So that's just the setting to... a brief introduction to the setting of the game. And also, before I leave the apartments, I want to come back here and look out the window. In fact, we're going to climb out the window. Let me just make sure I don't fall to my death. Alright, so this is Dunwall. What can we say about Dunwall? So the ship, let me talk about the ship before it moves out of sight. That is a metal ship, it's a steel ship. Right, curious. So this is why I say that we are maybe in the early 1900s, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. But the fact that we have steel ships, right, puts us in around about that time frame. We're not in wooden sailing ships, we are in steel ships. And in fact, we look at that ship. This ship is also steel-hulled. It's a kind of a paddle boat, and it's got a chimney on it. You would think that it's a steamboat. It's not actually well, maybe it is a steamboat. Alright, so a bit about the background of the technology of the game. This resembles Industrial Revolution London, right? And in fact, you have these smokestacks. You see the buildings there, they're brick. Mostly brick buildings and smokestacks. And like some of this metal piping that's retrofitted onto the stone and brick buildings. So you have like new technology being added to old buildings. So again, there's this transition from pre-industrial to industrial, right? So the new industrial technology is being added to the pre-industrial structures, is what we're looking at, basically. In the real world, the Industrial Revolution was mostly driven by coal, like burning coal for energy and then using that energy to drive machines like steam engines, turbines, things like that. and then using those machines to run factories and ships and whatnot. In the setting of Dishonored, they use whale oil as their energy source, and their whales are not quite like our whales. Their whales are magic. That's a whaling ship, by the way. The frame there is to carry a whale. The whales in Dishonored are magic. They're magic whales, and their oil, when you burn them, they explode. They don't just burn, it actually explodes. And it appears that you can extract electricity directly from the whale oil. Not sure how that works, but it seems to be what's happening with the technology. We might encounter that technology later on in the game, but I just want to like introduce that to you. But aside from using whale oil instead of coal, aside from that particular detail, everything else is more or less Industrial Revolution Europe. Right. This city is quite densely populated, although the buildings are not very tall, right? So there is a limit to how tall you can make brick buildings, because brick has a certain strength, right? Like if you try to crush a brick, you might think, oh, that's pretty strong. But if you put enough weight on it, the brick will eventually crush. And so you can only build brick building so tall before either the brick at the bottom gets crushed, or you need so much structure at the bottom that there's no more space for any rooms, right? Like when you get to, well, it depends on the brick, but usually like 6 or 7 stories is practical. You can get up to like 12, 13 stories with brick, I think, if I remember right. But even by then, at the bottom you have such thick brick walls holding up all the brick above that there's very little space for the rooms, because the walls are too thick, and so the rooms are, you left with very little space for the rooms. So brick can't really get much taller than these chimneys. Not really. I mean, maybe taller, but not too much. Like, and it's quite dangerous because if they fall down, people die, they get crushed. So what that means is that they're not using architectural steel, because to get past this height limit, you have to use stronger materials, things like steel. So we can see, like, what that means is there's enough steel to make boats, right? So from all this we infer the technology and the economy of, like, there's enough steel to make boats, there's enough steel to make like these sort of pipes and machinery. There's not enough steel to actually build entire buildings out of it, to build like steel skyscrapers. Not sure if this is just like copying real-world Industrial Revolution cities, or if they actually think about the technology. But in the real world, that's what it means. Oh, if you look at that as well, see that little detail down there. Those are steel beams, steel structure for a bridge. Although the bridge kind of broke down there. There used to be a bridge across the river there, but it broke down, I guess, and got washed away. So like steel, so there are steel structures, just not houses, like not apartment buildings, but there's like steel bridges. So there is like steel being used for structural purposes, but it's not quite affordable enough to have like all steel skyscrapers in the city. Alright, what else do we need to say about this? Not too much, right? Most of it is the same thing, copy and pasted. Alright, so that tells us a little bit about the economy and the technology level. There is more, right? Behind here, we have a secret safe room. And once we get into the secret safe room, you'll already notice things that are a little bit different. First of all, it is significantly less fancy. All the wooden paneling is gone. You see all this? We have wooden paneling covering up the stone, so all of that is gone. Because nobody's supposed to come back here except for the Empress herself. So this is private, super private, and so we don't need to show off to anyone. because none of the guests are ever going to come up here. Secondly, we have these ventilation machines. I mean, this is pretty advanced technology. Like, it's not too advanced, but it is pretty advanced. I guess we're kind of in like a... Like, the Industrial Revolution is well and truly happening. We have things like electric cabinets. So this is electric. So widespread use of electricity, electric lights, as we said before. So remember before, back in the throne room, I was saying, well, maybe the fact that there are candles and electric lights side by side, that maybe electricity is new. But once we get back here, well, maybe it's not that new. This seems like a very well-established electric machinery, right? This is not new technology. It doesn't seem like that to me. This is a very well-developed technology. So if we take this and we think back to the candles in the throne room, maybe they're just old-fashioned that way in the throne room, right? That doesn't really make sense. Also the roof. Look at this roof. That is a steel-framed glass roof. And I have a lot to say about steel-framed glass. I was saying earlier that, you know, looking out at the skyline, there didn't seem to be, like, architectural steel or structural steel in architecture. And yet here we are, we come back here, and this is structural steel in architecture, right? It's like steel frame holding up a glass skylight. Now, steel, I've been saying this all along, like, you know, before the Industrial Revolution, you make steel things by hand. And so if you make this sort of thing by hand, it takes you a long time. Like, you need the blacksmith to work on this for a long time, so it's expensive. And in the real world economy, it's so expensive that you wouldn't really use it in architecture. Or if you did use it in architecture, it would be like a small thing that's really expensive that a rich person would put in their house. So like if you have like a... If you're the kind of person who live in a palace, which I guess I am, because I'm the empress of the Isles. So like maybe this is made by hand. Because I could afford it. I could afford to hire a bunch of blacksmiths to make this stuff by hand. But probably it's not, because you notice how they're all the same. Like, if this is made by machine, like if this is like cast mostly by machine, or it's kind of semi-automated, like if you have like large-scale steel industry and you can crank this out using mass production methods, then it wouldn't be as expensive, is what I'm trying to say. Instead of like forging each piece by hand, you just kind of cast the whole thing and just cast it, and then you make another one, cast it, make another one. In the factory line, then steel elements like this become a lot cheaper. So in the real world, what happens is, as the Industrial Revolution developed, and these machines got more and more advanced, and the production of steel got bigger and bigger, and it got cheaper and cheaper, then eventually these steel elements became cheap enough that you could afford to use them in buildings. And of course these days we have like aluminium window frames in every house, and it's like nobody thinks it's really extravagant or anything. But you know, back in the Industrial Revolution, like this would be extravagant. Right? Like you need to think about the context of this. And not just the steel, but also the glass. Like glass making technology also developed significantly over the years. Like making large sheets of glass is actually kind of difficult. The most advanced way these days, I think we use float glass these days. Float glass, what is float glass? Float glass is you have a bed of molten metal, and then you pour the glass on top of the molten metal. The molten glass on top of the molten... Because the molten glass is lighter than the molten metal, the molten glass will sit as like a sheet of molten glass on top of the molten metal, and then when it cools, you have a sheet of really flat glass. A large sheet of really flat glass. That's how you make it. That's not easy, by the way. Don't try that at home. don't try molten metal at home. But like making that stuff, it's difficult, and there has been like a number of different glass making techniques over the years. One of the earliest is like you blow glass. Like you get a glob of molten glass, you get a long tube, you blow into it, it expands into like a ball, and then you can work it. So this is like handmade glass. People still do handmade glass things in some parts of the world, but mostly it's for like art and, you know, decorative purposes, because it's expensive, because you need to make each thing by hand. So you can blow glass, and like the glob, you can like turn it into a cylinder. Like you spin it, and then you can spin it into a cylinder, and then what you do is you cut the cylinder, and then you keep it heated so it's soft, but it's not liquid, but it's kind of soft. You cut it, and then you flatten it out, and so that's one of the early methods of making a sheet of glass. Is you kind of blow the glass, make a cylinder, cut it, and then flatten it. But because you're flattening the thing by hand out of a cylinder, the end result is it's not actually very flat. Like it can be kind of wobbly, and if you look through the glass, you can see that the glass is kind of wobbly. That's one way to make a flat piece of glass. Another way is to spin the glass. So you take the glob again. You take a glob of molten glass, you stick it on the pole, and you spin the pole, and then the glass kind of spins around, and the centrifugal force of spinning the glass kind of turns it into a disc. And then you cut the thing off the disc, and then you cut the circular disc of glass into a square, and then that's a square window. So that's, I forgot what it's called. Is it called disc glass? I forgot what it's called. But what happens then is you have these like circular rings in the glass, because the glass isn't perfectly like distributed when you spin it. When you spin it, like there's kind of thick bits and thin bits, and then in the middle there's the point where it's connected to the rod. And so then the glass, you would have like this circular pattern in the glass. But you have a big sheet of glass, but it's kind of circular pattern. So that's another way of doing it. Yet another way of making glass is you have drawn glass. You have a wire, you have molten glass, and then you pull the wire out of the molten glass, and the glass sticks to the wire. And as you pull it out, you try to pull it out at a constant speed. And as you pull it out, the glass will stick to it, and then it will cool, and then you end up with a sheet of glass as you pull it out. But again, you have wobbly bits, because I mean, as much as you try to pull it out at a constant rate, like it's still not going to be perfectly flat. And then after that, you have float glass. There might be other ways too. That's what I can remember off the top of my head. Anyway, what I'm saying is there are a number of different ways of making glass, and as the technology improved, you get better quality in the optics. Because float glass is just perfectly flat. All the other stuff will be slightly wobbly in different patterns. But you have like larger and larger pieces of flatter and flatter glass. And so at this point, when you look at that, it seems like a relatively large, like it's not that big, but it's a fairly large piece of like perfectly flat glass. So if we look at this, all that is to say, if we look at this and we think about this in terms of modern day technology, this is pretty advanced stuff. Like it's not as advanced like today with our technology. We wouldn't need to divide that into these like long strips. We could just have like one sheet of glass that size, no problem, today. But you know, back, I don't know, 80, 100 years ago, they couldn't do that. What is it, 120 years ago, they couldn't quite do that. So, but like glass making is not easy, right? So again, being able to afford a lot of big pieces of glass, either you had to be really, really rich, or you had to be in a time where somebody had developed the technology to build the factory to automate the making of these pieces of glass. And if you have a factory churning this out, then it becomes cheaper and it becomes more affordable. So again, this suggests the level of technology that we're dealing with. And again, if we like compare that glass compared to like this, like you see how small these pieces of glass are. And you look at this, this is tiny, look at this. You have like tiny, tiny squares of glass inside the frame. So I think this is handmade. I think these things are handmade. I don't think they're even factory made. So you compare the size of these pieces of glass. Don't put your gun out, the gun away. So like everything back here is significantly lower tech than what the actual technology level of this world is. Isn't that interesting? So again, it seems like the Empress is a bit out of touch. If you just judge the Empress by this apartment, like it seems a little old-fashioned, it seems a bit out of touch. But once we get into like the safe room, we can see that no, this stuff exists. Like this exists and this exists. More advanced technology does exist. Maybe like the palace and the royalty is not keeping up with the latest thing. At least not in public. They're not keeping up with the latest developments in the world. Is what the like the technology and the architecture suggests, right? Wow, we spent a long time talking about glass. Okay, what else do we have to say? This is the safe room again. A private place. We have magnifying glasses, I guess is what these are. And again, like glass like this and like advanced optics tells us about the technology. There's a gas cylinder up there. I don't know what kind of gas is in there. There are alarm clocks, small clocks. Small clocks are more difficult to make than big clocks, by the way, because like every clock needs basically the same number of gears. But making a big gear for a big clock is easier than making a tiny gear for a small clock. So the smaller the clock, the more advanced the technology. So the grandfather clock we saw outside is nowhere near as advanced as this tiny little alarm clock here, is what I'm saying. That's not completely true because some clocks are more accurate than others, but given a similar level of accuracy, the smaller it is, the more advanced it is. Back here we have emergency gold. We have giant blocks of gold, Imperial Reserves, by the way. Not sure if that's gonna help anyone. And then back here we have a little bed here, a little, I guess a kitchen. Oh, here's the pooper. Look, you poop here. They do have poopers. So you have a toilet there, but there's no toilet in the actual bathroom outside. I missed the detail. Let me go back and then. Is it here? No. There are radiators. These look heaters. Radiators for heaters. So these things. This means you have a centralized boiler heating water to pipe into these space heaters to heat the room. That tells us a number of things. This tells us that, first of all, the climate here gets cold enough in winter that you would want permanent heating. That's one thing it teaches us. There are kind of heaters in every room. I mean, there's either heaters or, in this case, there's a fireplace. There's no firewood though, so I don't know where they keep the firewood. You need at least like a couple of logs every day if you want to keep that running, right? So wait a minute, there's a radiator there. Are there heaters anywhere else? But there's a heater. Look, there's heaters in the bathroom. They're black on black. That's why I missed them. Like they're actually quite hard to see. I don't think there are heaters out in the public space though, which is. I mean, it might be quite cold out here. In fact, in winter. Yeah, no, there's no heaters down here. There's no heaters and no fireplaces out here. Alright, anyway. So, radiators exist? This is centralized heating? Again, like, it's pretty advanced technology, right? So this is not early Industrial Revolution. This is fairly well-developed Industrial Revolution. Anyway. There's no this is the heating and the cooking. There's no radiators here because this is the safe room, right? So if the point of the safe room is that if the rest of your palace has been compromised, you retreat to the safe room, and the safe room should be self-contained enough that you can stay here for at least a couple of days. Which means self-contained cooking, self-contained heating, and self-contained pooping. And ideally self-contained water, so I don't know where the water comes from. In fact, where does the poop go? Anyways, let's not worry too much about that. So, oh, and there's like retrofitted pipes too. So pipes, because the pipes are newer than the structure, the pipes are outside the structure, right? And you can see how a lot of this stuff is retrofitted on. This is a little odd. I feel like the air duct should be sticking out of the wall a bit. So you can tell the age of a building compared to the age of the technology, because if you build a new building, all the pipes will be embedded in the walls so that you don't have pipes sticking out everywhere. But if you have an existing building that didn't have these pipes earlier, but you want to add these pipes in, then you wouldn't demolish the whole wall just to put the pipe in, you just put the pipe outside the wall, right? So when you have pipes outside the wall, either it's just to make it easier to maintain, or the pipe is newer than the wall, as opposed to the wall being the same age as the pipe, because if the wall is the same age as the pipe, they would bury the pipe inside the wall. That's usually what happens. Not always, usually what happens. So again, like retrofitting new technology into old structures. It's quite interesting to me. I don't know if you find it interesting, but you can like tell a lot about the structure and the technology and the architecture. But I was just saying that this is an electric light. But if this is an electric light, then the wires should be outside the wall. Because what powers this? Where are the wires? You see what I mean? There should be wires leading to a power source somewhere outside the wall. Because there shouldn't be wires inside the stone wall. Anyway, it's not entirely consistent. Last thing I want to say is that the glass roof is actually probably a security liability. I'm not sure why the safe room has a glass roof, because if you want to break in here, all you need to do is put a ladder, climb up the wall, get to the roof, cut the glass, or just smash the glass, and then you just climb in, and then you're in. Like the massive stone walls, the metal doors, these are all fine. The glass roof is a serious security liability for what's supposed to be a safe room. Not sure if that's really thought through. Anyway, let's go out. We can't go out the front door because gameplay reasons. So the gameplay will have us sneak out the back door, and we're trying to get down to the docks. Remember the boat before? Down at the docks? The game wants us to sneak down there. Okay, put the gun away. Back here we have corridor and storage. I think this is mostly forgotten. This is kind of dubious actually, because that window is missing the glass. It's not very well maintained, is it? It's not well maintained at all. So, as we go through this next part, we will see that, like beneath the shiny veneer of the palace of the city, things are not going well underneath, right? So once we get into this back corridor here, we can see that this palace it looks pretty run down back here. Not very good. So once you get past the fancy stuff that's supposed to impress your subjects, and once you get away from the throne room and everything else, yeah, the palace is not very well maintained back here. Alright, Dunwall. It's very grey, isn't it? as we look out at the skyline, we see a lot of chimneys. I want to point out the chimneys. Again, that implies that this place gets cold in winter. Like, it seems to imply that every room has a fireplace. So you don't want to be... because it gets cold in winter. And also, like, the relatively steep roofs suggest that it snows in winter. If it doesn't rain at all, then you can just have flat roofs. If it rains a little bit, you just need like a slight slope and the rain will fall off and you're fine. If you have a slight slope like this though, the snow will sit on the roof, and if you have too much snow on your roof will collapse because snow is pretty heavy. Snow is basically water, right? And water is pretty heavy. And so you don't want the snow sitting on the roof, and so what you do is you have like really steep roofs, and so the snow will slide off the roof and not stay there. So so you can tell like what the climate is of the places. If it's dry, it's just flat. If it rains a little bit, it's like this. And then if it snows, then the roofs will be like this. This is just for practical reasons. So chimneys plus steep roofs means that it definitely snows in winter. Sometimes it snows a lot in winter and it gets really cold. Right, so that tells us about the climate. And then if we look... oh, can I turn off that? Well, I don't need to do that. If we look out into the skyline there, look at that thing. That thing sticks out like a sore thumb. That is a steel-framed clock tower on top of the hill. So remember earlier I said that there seemed to be enough steel for boats, right? There's enough steel for boats. There's enough steel for like machinery. There's enough steel for bridges, but there's not really enough steel for buildings. Well, we're starting to have enough steel for buildings, because the clock tower is kind of a building. And that is definitely steel, although you can't see it very clearly, but the shape of it, and like see how thin those legs are, that can only be steel. So, yeah. So again, like, we're in this kind of like transitional spot in the architecture where we're just on the cusp of transitioning into having tall steel skyscrapers in this world. We don't have them yet, but you can see the technology is available. Like, we have the mass-produced glass, we have enough steel for towers like this, and you would imagine in maybe a few decades you would start to see steel skyscrapers on the skyline. And then everything's gonna change, right? The whole skyline is gonna change. Everything's gonna look different. But for now, like, you have this... I think maybe this is like thematically one of the most interesting times. Or one of the... What makes it... like, what's interesting? Interesting is when things are changing, right? When things are happening. And like, being right at the transition point between the old and the new. Being right at the transition point between like old stone buildings and this new technology. Like, this is interesting. Because you can see that things are changing. And the game is deliberately set in this sort of a time. I mean, there are other times in human history where, you know, things have changed. But the Industrial Revolution is definitely one of these big changes. Like, from pre-industrial to industrial was a huge change. And yeah, we can see it in the architecture, we can see it in the technology, like we can see it like the candles and the electric light, we can see it in the stone buildings, and then there's suddenly this steel building. So we see it everywhere. And the game kind of shows us this stuff through the environment. Okay, so that's all I want to say about this. I need to load the game to get down to the street level. What happens in the gameplay is that we have to sneak past a bunch of guards to get to the boat. And I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to load the game. And I'm going to load a save where I have already dealt with all the guards. And there are no more guards to try to stop us looking at architecture. So when I load the game, we are here. Where we were before was up there. So that's Dunwall Tower. You see how tall that building is? You might even recognize that tower there. So we were back there. So from this perspective, we can understand that the Empress's apartment is at the top of the tower. So Dunwall Tower is basically the palace. So there's a huge stone tower, and then at the top of the tower is the throne room, and then the Empress's private quarters. I mean, that's already strange. The fact that the throne room is at the top of the tower is strange, because the throne room is where the Empress meets the public, or meets like guests from outside. And usually you would have that on the ground floor because you don't want people coming into your palace, too far into your palace. So having the throne room at the top of the palace, at the point that's furthest away from the street, is odd. Is very odd. I mean, I think partly it's for gameplay reasons, because you want to transition from the cool in the throne room straight to you escaping from your apartment. And why is it so dark all of a sudden? Crazy. So I think partly it's for gameplay reason, and I think partly it's to emphasize how the Empress is like removed from the public, like how she's kind of up in her ivory tower, like up in nowhere, and then detached from the real world. I think it's supposed to imply that, and that would be consistent with the story too, because the Empress is kind of like not in touch with reality, or not in touch with her subjects down here. And that's why she got cool, by the way. That's why they overthrew her. But yeah, like from a practical perspective, it wouldn't make any sense to put the throne room on the roof of the palace. You would put it like, you would have like the front door, a waiting area, and then the throne room. Like you wouldn't, and then behind the throne room there'll be the other things. All right, so this is the street entrance to the palace complex. First of all, you will notice these security things made of black steel with black metal stuff, like this guardhouse here, and there's a little guard thing there, and then there's the gates here. There's a lot of security down here. And the second thing you should notice is that tram thing up there. This is I mean, trains are one of these like key parts of the Industrial Revolution, right? The use of coal to drive steam trains, which then had enough traction power to pull enormous amounts of freight over long distances, is part of what made the Industrial Revolution work. Like the ability to transport goods across long distances. That and like steamships and locomotives. And this world has trains. And if you look at like the train, like electric trains, which is very advanced, more advanced than the real world Industrial Revolution, by the way. We'd be still using steam trains based on the other technology things. But as I said before, like whale oil seems to be convertible into electricity, so anyways, fictional technology. The other issue is that this stuff is just hanging in the air like this, and you have freight trains going past. I don't know if this makes any sense structurally, because there's no way these thin little pieces of metal should be able to hold up that train. Imagine if this train is filled with stone, for example. Like, there's no way all that weight can be held up by rails that are this thin. So that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it looks cool. This looks really cool. It also looks really out of place. I don't know if anybody like really thinks of like structure and the strength of steel versus the weight of the trains like the way I am. But you look at this, and I think instinctively you would get the sense that something is kind of strange here. And I think that's the point of this. The point is that like this stuff is supposed to be a little bit strange. And it's supposed to suggest to you that some parts of this technology is not what you would expect in the real world, right? I'm not sure what else I want to say about that, because it's I mean, structurally, it's not possible. It's just structurally not possible to have such a heavy train on such a thin track, hanging in the air, right? Anyway, the other thing I want to say is that this is very advanced stuff. Like, these trains are very advanced stuff. And it's much more advanced than anything we were seeing in the palace. Even with the electric lights. Even with the, like, ventilation system and the electric ventilations. Like, this is a whole other level of technology. Having, like, tracks in the air like this. And again, it seems to imply that, like, the world is changing, and it's leaving the Empress behind. It's leaving the old world behind. It's leaving, like, maybe the Empress is not keeping up with what's going on in the real world. Like, if you think about it, like if we think back to the wooden paneling and the wooden furniture back in the palace, that's seriously old-fashioned compared to what we're seeing out here now with these trains, right? Alright, now we're out in the city. The city is divided by these gates. These gates here. Every so often you have one of these gates. Like, I don't know if you think they're out of place, but they're actually really, very, very strange. If you think about your own city, or any real-world city, how often do you find a gate just blocking off a street? Not a public street. Like, okay, if it's a private property, okay, there's a gate outside the private property, I get it. But this is not private property, this is a public street. Like, the street just disappears there. So these gates, the way these gates are in the game, you could just close these gates off and you can just seal off districts of the city. Isn't that crazy? So the whole city is like a giant prison where you can just close parts off and lock people in anytime you want. And that combined with like security like this and security like that and like barbed wire and like pointy bits on the trains and like barbed wire and barbed wire everywhere. It's actually super oppressive, you guys. This city is not, it's not a free city with happy people. This is an oppressive city where the people are oppressed. Like having like a closed gate in the middle of a city like this should be terrifying to you. You should not be happy with this. No one should be happy with this. There are a few apartments we can go. I'll talk about the leading building a little bit later. There are a few apartments we can go into here. Oh, and also people executed in the street. So just in case you don't understand the architecture of oppression, here is actual oppression, people being shot in the street, right? So private apartments, we again have this wood paneling. Slightly less fancy than the palace ones, but you know, similar. We have rooms that are sealed off for gameplay reasons. And not too sure what this is, to be honest. We do have electric lights up there. We have fish, and we have microscopes, and we have a dead rat. Some sort of biology thing going on here. Not too sure what this guy is doing. He might be a biologist. I don't know. I'm assuming that behind these doors will be like bedrooms and kitchens and things, but we can't go back there. We can just like see the parlor, the lounge. Not even the lounge, just like the front door, really. Another apartment over here. Again, we just get an entryway and one of the rooms. This one has a lot of books. And that's it. Like, nothing too remarkable. There's the really tall ceilings. I guess I should talk about the tall ceilings. Every building in this game has really tall ceilings. And not for any, like, practical reasons. Not for any practical architectural reasons. But it's for gameplay reasons. A lot of the gameplay in Dishonored is you climbing up on top of things and then jumping down and surprising people. Can I get up there? Not like this. Oh, I can't get up there. Right, so a lot of the gameplay is you sneaking around above the enemies and then dropping on them and surprising them. So that's the gameplay. And that's why all the buildings in Dishonored and Dishonored 2 have really tall ceilings. From an architectural perspective, it's just a lot of wasted space, right? I imagine if you lower the ceiling by that much, you can, like, every 3 floors you can have an extra floor. And an extra floor is worth a lot, by the way, because, like, you know, when you rent a building out, you rent out the floor space. So if you can, like, so if instead of a 3-story building, you can build a 4-story building in the same space and rent out 4 floors instead of 3, you make 33% more rent. So financially, you would not have a tall ceiling like this, because why would you accept less rent for your building, right? So if you're like a developer or if you're a landlord and you're building a thing to rent out, obviously you would try to fit as many floors as possible into the space, and so you wouldn't have tall ceilings. Never mind the fact that, like, you're not using that space, and like this heating, you're heating the space, but you're not using the space, and so you waste money on heating, you waste money on lighting, you waste money on just unused floor space, and so from a practical sense, you wouldn't have tall ceiling like this. You really won't, unless you're like a really rich person. But even then, you're still wasting your own money. Even if you can afford it, you're just wasting your own money, right? But yeah, from gameplay reasons, you do this. You jump up and down a lot. And also, like, I guess for stylistic reasons, just having like tall things look more impressive. Just make the game cooler, right? I guess. Alright, so about this thing. What happened here? What's going? Why is that thing slightly sideways? Is it drunk? Are you drunk? This building's drunk. The building's not really drunk. The building is sliding forward like that because the foundations are busted. Look at this. If you look down here, the edge of the street is there, and the retaining wall has collapsed. So this retaining wall down here has, like, kind of spilled out. Well, it spilled out that way. It spilled out, and so the earth has kind of slid down here, and because the earth has given way down here, the front of the building is no longer sitting on solid ground, so it's kind of tipping forward like this. So whose fault is this? Like, whose fault that this happened? Well, whoever's supposed to maintain this retaining wall is the one at fault, and I think this is the city, the government, because this is a public street. I believe this is part of the public street. What's happening here is that the public street is not being properly maintained, to the point where the retaining walls are collapsing, causing neighboring buildings to start falling over. So this is the government's fault. So this indicates poor government management, or negligent government, letting the city decay. So the city's not doing well, you guys. Like, the city's not being well managed, and things are falling apart. It's basically what's going on. Take care of your foundations, guys. Like, if you own a house, check your foundations, and make sure to fix the foundations before it gets too bad. Because if you just leave it, your building will fall down. The most important part of the building is the stuff underneath the building. Like, if the ground gives way, the whole building gives way. So just, you know, take care of your foundations, you guys. Yeah, this thing is done. There's no way this this building is done. The whole thing has to be demolished and rebuilt. Don't go in. If you see a building like this, don't go inside. Like what I'm doing now, really stupid. because at any moment this stuff could just fall down on you and kill you. So don't go into a building that looks like this. Just stay out. Just stay. In fact, just stay as far away as possible from a building that's leaning forward like that. I mean, like, but if you think about, like, in terms of like a storytelling, environmental storytelling, isn't that great? Like, the whole city is literally falling apart. Like, how do we tell the player that the city is falling apart? Oh, I know. We just have the city literally fall apart. Like, if you can't see that, then I mean, I don't know, you're blind. But like this is they're telling you that things are not going well in the city, right? Alright. So we have this main street. Again, we have another gate. Remember how I said earlier how the districts of the city are gated? And at any point, the guards can just close off the gates and shut you inside your part of the city. Super oppressive. We have a main street here. If we come down the side street, look at this. So out here we have this stone stuff, right? And it looks pretty good. I mean, there's some metal stuff going on there. Not sure what's going on with the metal. But the stone looks fairly good. As soon as you get past the front though, right? As soon as you get past the facade, it's not looking good. Look at the state of this brick stuff. Right, things are not going well in the city. Like, once you get past the facade, once you get past the veneer at the front, you will find that, like, the city is just falling apart. Like, we saw that up in the palace. Once we get into the back rooms, everything's falling apart. Same thing with the city here. So again and again, the game is just telling us the same story, right? Is that, you know, things look kind of okay on the surface, but actually things are rotten underneath. There are a couple of buildings we can go into here. First of all, let's go into, what's this? Dunwall Courier. This is the newspaper office. Let's come in here, take a look. Down here, this is the public area, private. Back there. And then here we have records and restroom. The restroom is boarded off, there's no restroom for us. Records is slightly weird because there's no actual records here. They might have used the wrong sign here. This is not records. This is definitely not records. It's more like a waiting room or a lounge or something, but there's no records here. Wrong sign. Anyway, back here, private. There's a sort of a reception up here, and then a staircase. I do want to point out that the staircase is too spacious and too big, architecturally speaking. You don't want the staircase to take up any more space than absolutely necessary, because again, like, think of it economically, right? You don't really sell the staircase. You sell rooms, or you rent out rooms. Like, when you rent a room, you rent out, you know, the bedroom, the dining, the kitchen. You don't really pay for the stairs. You don't want to pay for the stairs. You have to pay for the stairs to the extent that you have to be able to get up and down. But you don't really use the stairs. You use all the other rooms that the stairs allow you to access, right? So the smaller the stairs are, the bigger the other spaces can be. So, you know, practically speaking, you want your stairs to be as small as possible while still being functional, in order to have the other spaces be as big as possible, which you actually want to use. So like, having this like open space here in the middle of the stairwell doesn't make any sense. And having the stairs being this wide also doesn't really make any sense. Those stairs could be like maybe this wide. It could be like a quarter narrower and still be fine. The reason the stairs are this big is, again, for gameplay reasons. Remember I talked about how a lot of the game is about you going up and down and surprising people underneath you. So again, if somebody's walking down there, you can jump down and surprise them. So that's why the stairwell is so big, is for gameplay reasons. It's not really for any architectural reasons. Architecturally, you would want this to be much, much smaller. Because, like, I mean, think about this. Look at how wide this is, right? Let me just like get back down. Look at how wide this is, and then compared to how wide the rest of this is. The stairs are like a quarter? No, like a third of the whole building? You have a building and 1/3 of your whole building is just the staircase. That's so much wasted space. Unbelievable. Like only 2/3 of the building is used for anything else other than stairs. Right, then you wouldn't want to do that. But yeah, but again, because so much of the gameplay in Dishonored is vertical, you have these big vertical staircases where you can jump up and down. Anyway, up at the 3rd floor, we have the actual newspaper office. I don't know what happens in the other floors, but there's not much newspaper work going on there. Up here we have desks and typewriters. I guess there might be printing presses in the other floors. We don't get to access those. The actual records are here. I mean, there's no sign, but this looks more like the records room. There's a grandfather clock in the corner there. Not sure why they would put it there, because it's inside the record. Wouldn't you put the clock out here? You would. You would put the clock out here. Probably makes more sense out here. Anyway, offices, offices, more offices. A bit of a balcony. Not too much to see from the balcony. Alright, so that's the newspaper office. Let's go back out. And downstairs. This staircase is so big. This staircase is massive. Alright, so there's a newspaper office there. Opposite on the other side of the street is Boyle. I don't actually know what Boyle is. I mean, Boyle is a name. But I don't know what the... Oops, I don't know what the building is. I mean, it's a crime scene, first of all. Somebody was murdered here, and now it's a crime scene. But aside from the fact that it's a crime scene, I'm not sure what Boyle is. You'll notice that all the displays have been smashed and everything's been stolen. So whatever they were selling here, I can't really tell because it's been stolen. There's some clocks here. I don't know if they sell clocks. There's a scale there. Maybe they sell precision instruments, I guess? I mean, they might also sell jewelry, and maybe the jewelry got stolen? Would the clockmaker and the jewelry shop be the same thing? They might be, because they both work with really small things, right? Like small pieces of metal. So maybe it's a jewelry store? Because the other thing we can see is that there's like security. You see like there's these bars here, and I guess they do sales here. So they're doing something valuable, like it could be a bank, could be like a jewelry store or something. Restricted area, if we come back here, we'll find safes. A lot of safes, so they do deal with valuables. Right? Exactly what though, I'm not sure. It might be like in some of the books in the game. I mean, there's a lot of books in the game, but... Bone charms, I mean, they don't deal with bone charms, it's just a book. They might deal with in all sorts of like small valuable objects. Let me just try to look for some clues. Nope, just an office area. And then back here we have kind of like workshops, which is kind of curious. Burner? Bottles for chemicals? Desks with these like squares on it. Engineering square is just like a thing that's at 90 degrees, and that's how you like to check if something is you know, square. Engineering square, in case you want to buy one. And then there's like clocks and machine things. And tools. Oh, cameras and flashes. This one's making or fixing clocks. Microscope. A burner. And then this guy has vice and grindstone. So they're making things here, I guess. They're making smallish items. Small valuable items. It's probably a jewelry store. Right, all this stuff indicates a jewelry store. Either a jewelry store or some other small valuable things is what they're selling here. Okay, cool. I mean, all the parts make sense. Like all the rooms make sense is what I mean, right? You have like a showroom out the front, and then you have like a shop counter here, but there's high security because you're dealing with expensive goods, and then there's like a safe, and then there's like workshops upstairs. So all the pieces are there. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool how we can work out what the function of the place is just by looking at the architecture and the furnishings? Right, so you can read architecture like this. Isn't that cool? If you understand enough about architecture. Alright, let's go back up. None of the jewelry is available for us to steal. Maybe I've stolen it already. I don't remember actually. Back here we have another alleyway. Let me come back here. So, back in this alleyway... taxes, 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 taxes. The game is telling us that there's a lot of taxes in Dunwall, and people aren't happy about it. And you'll notice that, again, once we get out of the main street, things are not looking good back here, right? The city is decaying. The city is seriously decaying, and things are not going well. Right? It's not. It's the opposite of clean. Back here we have a little courtyard, and we have fish markets, locally sourced, family owned. We have wine markets, and then we have what's going on here. Hemlock from Belton poisoned, a poison shop. It's for poisoning rats, I guess. It's not for poisoning people, I don't think. And then we have like we have rat skewers if you want to eat them. So there's a little market square here. It's very strange that the market square is not really connected to the main street, which is down there. Like when you have a shop, you want the shop front to face the main street, so that as many customers as possible walk past your shop front. Having like a shop in a little courtyard behind an alleyway, behind a bunch of dumpsters, that's not the best place to put your shop, because who's gonna come back here to buy your stuff? No one's even gonna know that you have a shop back here. So the streets and the alleyway is a little strange. But in terms of the general location, you'll notice that we're getting closer and closer to the docks down there. So the fact that the shops are close to the docks, that's a good idea, because you would unload the goods off of the docks, get them to your shop, and then the people will buy things from the shop. So like in terms of like buying from the docks and then selling to customers, having a shop here is good, but the fact that there's no staircase here, so that the customers can't actually get to your shop, that's not good. So, you know, it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense. The general location of these shops makes sense, but the actual putting them behind an alleyway, behind a bunch of smelly dumpsters, like there's literally a dumpster here by the way, that doesn't really make sense. Alright, let's go into the docks. Oh, that's the map of this city. The fact that the docks are behind the gate kind of makes sense, if we consider that the docks might be private, or It doesn't seem that way though. I think this is a public road. Anyway, there's a gate here. I'm just saying that the gate probably is inconvenient for the people who live here. We have some buildings that are shuttered up. We don't know what they are, but they are for sale. They're all empty and for sale. I'm just thinking, right, how should we interpret that? On the one hand, if there's a lot of empty shop fronts and everything's for sale but nobody's buying, it would suggest that the economy is bad. Like if all the shops are empty and no one can afford to rent them, and you know, all the businesses have shut down. On the other hand, we are like in a pretty ugly and dirty part of the city. So it's not like it's a highly desirable part of the city. So maybe people just aren't renting because it smells bad around here, right? We're next to the ocean. We're next to the factory. So maybe it's just because it smells bad and people don't want to rent this place? Or maybe the economy is bad. Not sure. On the other side of the street, we do have a tavern. There's an anchor. There's no name for the tavern. The tavern is a tavern. Presumably they also sell a bit of food. Ask for a special homemade mulberry mead. Okay, so they have mead. They have a dartboard. I think they have some food here. Let's not go into the kitchen. So a tavern next to the docks makes a lot of sense. You have sailors coming in. They'll come over, get some food, get a bit of drink. So probably fairly good business. As long as the docks are busy, this tavern will have good business, right? So the tavern next to the docks makes a lot of sense. Oh, hey look, we have a back area here. I don't think there's too much to say about the tavern. Alright, and then past this, the train tracks continue going that way. We have a bunch of factories, I believe. These look very industrial. What does that say? The world-famous Pratchett warehouse for the best Tivian produce. Look for Pratchett. All of our products are manufactured in accordance with all applicable environmental laws. That's a promise. Your primary source for nutritious whale meat in Dunwall. Alright. And that says whale meat. So that's a whale meat processing factory, possibly? I mean, it's possible that the billboard has nothing to do with the building. It could be just an advertising. But there are some factories back there, and we can't get back there. And again, it's gated, so we can't. Oh, there's a head there. Just thinking, like, there are so many gates in the city. It's so oppressive. There's an industrial yard here. Nothing too special. Various industrial things lying around. Oh, again, executed people. It's pretty grim, isn't it? Oh, hey, look at those. A whaling poster? Or a mural? Brined hagfish? Very cool. The art looks kind of good, actually. All the stuff from the factory just gets dumped right into the ocean. So that probably smells pretty bad. And then there's the boat. The docks are down there. The docks are a little bit strange again, in the sense that how do you get stuff from the ship to the road? I mean, you can bring them up the stairs, but can you imagine like trying to lift crates and boxes up the stairs? Right, there's no cranes, there's no ramps, there's no elevators or anything there, it's just stairs. So anything that comes off the boat has to be carried up stairs. In bags like this. Because how else are you gonna get up the stairs with heavy equipment? How does that get down here? Right? I... I mean, it might be a space thing. If you go to any real dock or port in the real world, they're huge, like they're massive. And like you'd have like ramps and cranes and machines and everything. I think maybe it's just to keep the size of this manageable for the gameplay and not too complicated. So they just kind of shrunk the whole port, the whole dock down. And in doing so, they just took out any logical way to get goods up the stairs. Anyway, let's not complain about that too much. The docks, they're docks. Aside from being a little too small, because imagine like how big can the ship, if the ship has to fit in there, it's actually really tiny. It's a really tiny ship that sits in. Even that ship can't fit in here, so you can imagine like how small these ships are. So I think the whole docks is just too small. If this was like twice as big in each direction, it would make more sense. But you know, like a lot of things in video games are scaled down to make them manageable for gameplay. So aside from that, all the pieces are here. We have like places for the ships to berth, and then we have warehouses for the goods when they get transported out. We have some cranes, although these cranes don't really go anywhere. Like a real dock would have just more cranes and just everything bigger, right? Alright, and now we're down at the docks. I believe that is the end of the first part of our architecture tour of Dishonored 2. Let me just check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Safe room, palace gates, electric sham, gates, apartments, newspaper, boils, courtyard. Alright, yeah, no, that's everything. That's everything. Alright, I'm gonna end this video here, but the series continues. In the next video, we will introduce ourselves to Karnaca. So in the game, we get on the boat, and the boat takes us to Karnaca, away from Dunwall. Alright, I will see you there.